Hello Sofa Squad, welcome back to the sofa. That's the sofa, my name's Paul, and my trusty sidekick Roscoe is off in the bedroom right now as we speak. Now what I wanted to come to you all and talk to you about today was the recent Dateline 2020 episode. It featured Adam Cox. It was called Adam and Evil. Now what this was in relation to is the Lori and Chad Daybell case. If you've been following that, then you know. If you have not been, this is the case of aka zombie mom, the woman whose children went missing, and just absolute carnage followed her and Chad in their new little bizarre quest to take the world over and save us all from ourselves. That's for an entirely different video. So in this episode of Dateline 2020, they are interviewing Adam Cox, who is the brother of Lori Daybell. Now another key player in this case, his name was Alex Cox. That is Adam and Lori's brother. Alex died during the midst of all this after, probably taking the lives of many people. He is no longer here. So that being said, now one of the things, like the taglines or whatever you want to call it, for the Dateline episode was, this is Adam's first, television interview and so on and so forth. Now, so he hasn't been that outspoken publicly like this yet, right? So one of the things that the episode did is it relied pretty heavily on like past interviews, maybe some stuff we haven't heard. Like if you follow the case pretty closely, you've kind of heard it. It was from a different perspective though. Now some of the other interviews you'll recognize immediately type thing. One thing I will say overall for the episode is, say you're kind of new to the case or, whatever. Like, let's say you haven't paid attention to every single little tiny detail of it. This is like a very good skim the surface, boom, 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 boom. However, that being said, also, if you're new to the case, you're going to be hearing almost like a viewpoint from Lori's family for the most part. You do hear from a couple of other people in here, but it's kind of like this viewpoint from her family. So I would probably say it's pretty skewed from the storyline or the perspective that you would get in other instances. Nonetheless, it is still worth a watch, to definitely watch it. And again, if you're following the case, you're going to want to watch it because part of it you're going to be like, really, they said that? Kind of a thing or whatever. And then again, it's just, it's a different perspective to hear it from. So again, what I want to do for this video, I want to focus on some of the things that Adam was saying, kind of just talk about that and whatnot. I do want to talk about a couple of the other things that other people said as well, but mostly just focusing on Adam, some of the things he said, and also just some overall questions I guess I had in regards to, well, how come this didn't go this way maybe, or that type thing. So here's what we're going to do for this. I have my notes, my laptop set up right here. So I might be kind of like glancing over those to refer to them. And again, this is going to be kind of a shorter video if you've gotten used to my long videos that I've been doing the last several weeks. This is going to be a relatively short one here. So let's go ahead and dive right in. Okay, so like I said, Adam is the brother to Lori Daybell, the brother to Alex Cox. Now, Adam will say, well, first of all, he's a DJ. He works in the radio business. He's a DJ. And he will say, you know what, my family's not the same. You don't know who you can trust. You don't know who's lying. You don't know who's saying this, who's talking to who, so on and so forth, right? Now, for those of us who follow this, we've kind of been able to see from Lori's family that there was like a lot of, first of all, her and Alex, hello. But then when we've seen the stories of, from her mother or her sister, Adam, some things just don't really add up, right? Or whatever. So interesting that he's kind of saying, and we'll get into this a little bit further, how he's been cut off from the family and things of that nature or whatever because of some actions that he took. So let's talk about said actions. So first of all, he will say that, he's talked to his mother and that she has talked to Lori, and that basically like his mom saying, it's the same Lori that we've always known, and she hasn't really come to terms. Being in jail hasn't made her come to terms with the reality of like what's happened or whatever. Now, I do find that to be interesting because I'm kind of like, okay, so what version of her did you know, right? And secondly, what are we talking about when we say that, okay? She hasn't come to terms with that. Is is she still in La La Land, which I don't really believe that coming from her. You know, has she, essentially that just left me with a lot more questions. Let's just leave it at that, right? I also don't believe much of what comes out of his mother's mouth either, so there's that. Now, one thing I do think that he said was interesting, well, a lot of things, but specifically when he talks about the relationship between Lori and Alex. Okay, so first of all, he's like, you know what, Alex was always a loner, he never really had many friends, and so when Lori would be the type of person to be like, Alex, you know, come over, or let's go out to dinner, or what do you think about this, whatever, he was always up for it, right? And, you know, it's just kind of like, okay, great, you know, I don't really have anything else going on. To me, it almost made it sound like, you know, Lori was like a just add water life to him. So that also makes things interesting for some other stuff that we'll talk about here in just a little bit. Before we get into that, one thing he said about Alex is he was like, you know what? Alex is like the most talented person in our family. And I was just like, okay, that's, you know, interesting. And he was like, Alex could be making millions of dollars if he was in Vegas, like being an impersonator. And he talks about his comedy routine and all that. Now, I mean, call me bitter and biased, but I was just like, I from what I've seen, I ain't seeing it. Okay, you know, but to each their own with that opinion. Now, again, what he said about Lori is he was like, you know what, we always envisioned, I'm assuming he met him in the family or whatever, you know, Lori like marrying the star quarterback and just kind of having that like perfect life, right? Now, here's my thing. I'm like, usually, you know, historically, when you go back and look at like that whole vibe of like sweetheart meets sweetheart, college or high school, they get married, never leave the town, all that, a lot of times beneath that surface, it's a hot mess. And I think that would have proved true for Lori if she had gone that way, because she clearly ended up being a hot mess regardless. But, you know, he's like, but she didn't go that way, you know, she clearly went another way. So one thing the show also does is they go through like a quick timeline of Lori's marriages. I know that statement with the word quick in it is, you know, difficult to comprehend, but we'll go through it quickly. One reason that I want to is because Janice chimes in. Remember, Janice is Lori's mother. She chimes in with like not information, but like her opinion on these men, right? And I'm kind of like, very telling. So Lori's marriages would start very early, right? And Adam will say in this TV show, he'll say, Lori basically just announced, like, I'm getting married, you know, I am leaving this house kind of thing. I'm getting married very young. She had this whole thing going, and they were all kind of surprised by it, the way he describes it. You know, like, what? You know, again, we envision her, you know, marrying the quarterback, all this kind of stuff. He will also describe Alex as like, you know, marrying young and getting out of the house. Now, side note, remember, Alex married the woman named Debbie. Debbie is the one who we heard semi-recently where she talked to the police about her marriage to Alex, her very short-lived one, because she was like, yeah, him and Lori had a completely inappropriate relationship, and like it was there's all sorts of wrong going there, right? And so she was like, I'm out of here. And thank God she might not be here today if she had stayed. So I do think it's interesting that both Lori and Alex were like, get us out of here, right? So that part I found intriguing. So Lori moves out very early. She marries a guy named Nelson. Now Janice and her lipstick will chime in, and she'll be like, I didn't really like him, you know. And it's like, but she ended up marrying him anyways. And I'm like, well, that probably fueled that fire. Like if the, you know, the parents or the mother at least was like, I don't like him or whatever. So, you know, that part was like, okay. So then after that, Lori marries William. This is who she will have Colby with. As we know now, that doesn't last. Lori then marries Joseph. This is who she has Tylee with. As we know now, that doesn't last. Then Lori will marry Charles Vallow. This is who she adopts JJ with. Remember the situation with Charles taking in JJ. It's not his biological son, but he's the uncle, that kind of thing. So that's who she adopts him with. So what I did find interesting with Janice is that this part she comes about Charles Vallow. She's talking about how much they liked him, and you know, Alex and Charles got along. They loved each other. We, you know, da 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 da. So here's my thing, and now I'm gonna say this. This is just my opinion here, but you know, these were the things going on through my mind. I'm like, wasn't he paying their bills or something? You know what I'm saying? And I just feel like that might be, you know, creating that there. But then I'm also like, hello, like, no, that you don't, like, almost like I felt like you don't get to say that, you know what I'm saying, because they also quickly turned on him, right, and they just were throwing him under the bus. And I mean, I personally felt all contributed to what happened to him, whether their hands were on it or not, right, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So honestly, that part kind of like really ticked me off, because I was like, that's not, you don't get to come on TV and say that, you know what I mean, like, whether you felt like that at some point or not, I just felt like it was unfair, right? So there was that. She gives her 2 cents on Lori's men. Let's go to the next thing. Okay, so let's talk about what Adam says his reactions were to, like, Lori's belief system. He cites a few examples here. So one example that he cites is, he's like, you know, Lori was telling me the story, and she was like, you know what, I was at the temple. I did see Jesus Christ in person, face to face. We had a conversation. And in the show, Adam is like, oh, you know, that's, you know, what are you talking about? You know what I mean? Like, that's what's going on here. And he starts to talk about this basis of beliefs that she's coming up with and how it doesn't seem right. So then another point, he cites a couple of other examples, and he's like, Lori was telling him that she was turning into a translated being. You know, and of course it's like, okay, that's interesting. You have my attention. What is a translated being, Lori? And she's like, well, basically the way it works is, number one, I don't have to eat anymore. That's very convenient. Number two, if someone say word like shoot me, the bullet goes right through me. Okay, it don't work no more. I'm translated. And that's when, obviously, if somebody told you this, especially your sister, right, that they are all claiming was this perfect person, completely normal, no red flags, wonderful mother, so on and so forth, right? And then they come up with that. This is not good, okay? I'll get to some of my questions about what he's saying in a minute. Right now we're just going face value of what he's saying in the show, okay? With maybe a little bit of my opinion sprinkled in there. So he's saying that obviously this is cause for alarm, right? He will say that he goes to his mother and tells her, yeah, your girl is toe up. And the mother, Janice, will say, Lori, and he'll say this too. He's like, but Mom said Lori hasn't told me that. And Janice will say the same, something to the same effect. You know, I didn't hear that from Lori, or you know, so on and so forth. Okay, so we do have to pause right there and just stop. Again, we are going on what we have heard from face value. Lori's completely normal. Never any kind of sign of this. Which I have a hard time swallowing that. Mostly from her immediate family. Because I do think that people, like your immediate family pretty much knows you. People who raised you, right? Or around you, all this kind of stuff. I can see how maybe extended family or extended friends, people like this, you can keep up appearances is what I'm getting at, right? So there's that. So I have a hard time when I hear from people like Janice and Adam that's totally normal until, you know, all of a sudden out of the blue. But maybe that was the case. You know, I didn't know her personally. Anyways, so at this point in time, I'm just trying to imagine where, like, your son comes to you and says, your daughter, my sister, says that she's a translating being and doesn't have to eat anymore and bullets will go through her. In addition to, at this point, he would have been like, and there's this other sign, this other sign, whatever. Like, we can assume that, make that assumption. The response I would not want to hear is, well, she didn't tell me that. Like, what, like, that makes me say, why would that be her response if all of this is legit, right? I also question, you know, which again, Adam's saying that, you know, he ends up, and we'll talk about this in 1 second, where he ends up talking to Charles, because obviously we've seen evidence of Charles going to police, right? The body cam footage, where Charles is like, she has lost her mind. Like, he is calling out to police exactly what is going to happen to him. This is what is so frustrating about it. You know, so when you see this and see all this kind of stuff where everyone will say, oh, I warned everybody. Oh, I did this. You know, whatever. You know, did you? You know what I'm saying? So, but Charles is we know, we have evidence of this. We don't really have like 100% evidence for other people doing this, but whatever. So that's what really frustrates me with it. So Adam will say at a certain point that he and Charles kind of form this alliance, right? And because basically Charles knows that Lori is crazy and that she has lost her mind, and Adam is saying that he has seen this as well, like, okay, yeah, she's a translated being, she's this, she's that. So they'll kind of start corresponding, talking about these things, comparing notes, so on and so forth. So then Adam will talk about, basically this leads up to the chain of events to the day that it was all taking place, where Charles lost his life to Adam's brother, Alex. Now, before we arrive at that moment, at that morning, it's also important to note that some of the things Adam was saying in the show about Alex getting into these beliefs, and as well as Adam talking about his family. Now, Adam will say, like, when Lori did that whole, I'm a translated being thing, and he called her out being like, girl, you're not right or whatever, she was like cutting him off, like trying to be like, nope, he has called me out, I'm done, don't need it, see ya, And that by him doing this, it's like causing his other family to, ostracize him, essentially, cut him off, whatever. Okay, so there's that. Now, when he talks about Alex, now remember how he talked about earlier, where Alex is kind of like always around, like a little lap-dog for Lori, like, what do you want to do now? So there's that. So he's saying, like, look, as Lori is like getting more and more into this Chad Daybell thing, in the books and all this kind of stuff, and talking about this dude, she's encouraging Alex to read his books, listen to his podcast. And Adam will say, Alex was a truck driver. He had all this time to listen to the podcast, read the books, do all this stuff. So, and I can see that with Alex, right? Because honestly, I think Lori could have said anything to him. And at this point, I think he would have believed it and been like, okay, well, that's what we're going to do. I just think he was that type person. I just think he didn't have anything really going for himself, right? And so that's how he felt important. And as his group formed, that's how he made himself important. Like, I'm the person who's facilitating these crimes and whatnot, but that's a whole other video. Okay, so let's go back to the morning that Alex takes Charles's life. So remember, as just said, Adam has like this thing going with Charles. They're exchanging notes, all this stuff. They're going to plan this intervention on Lori. Now, again, we are going on what Adam has said in this. So from his perspective, right? He is saying that he's like, to plan it up, he texts Alex. And he's like, I'm coming into town. I'm going to stay at your place. And allegedly, okay, cool. See ya. So they're planning this up. And then someone, a family member, I believe it was Janice at this point, but they do not say this in the show, tips Lori off to what's happening. Your brother's coming into town, all this stuff's going on. Now remember, at this point, all of this turmoil had been going with Lori and Charles. She had already been spitting his name through the mud. So this is where I'm just like, when I hear Janice saying, not too long ago, oh, well, we loved Charles, he was my favorite husband of hers and all this stuff, and I'm just like, really? Like, I'm not buying that. But so all that's going on, right? So then Adam will say, all of a sudden I'm not hearing from Alex, and I'm just like, what's going on? And so then he says he gets I believe a text message the morning of this incident, and it's Charles basically saying, like, look, Alex is at Lori's. I went over to pick up JJ for school. Alex is there, describing the scenario, and Adam will say it kind of hit him like, it all made sense, right? Like, oh my God, like, we were going to do this intervention. All of a sudden Alex quits talking to me. He's staying the night at Lori's. He has a gun over there. All this kind of stuff. Well, obviously, as we know now, moments later, a little bit later, Charles is on the floor dead, right? And so from that perspective right there, okay, so pause for a second. And he's like, oh, it all clicked and all this. So I guess my whole thing right then and there is like, okay, did you call the police at that point? You know what I'm saying? Like, if all this clicked into place of, oh, this is an ambush, or oh, this is whatever, that part didn't really make sense to me. So there's that. So then Adam will talk about, and this is a part that I am murky on, so I don't want to say, I do not know the timeline of when Adam either actually reached out to police after the fact, like during investigation, or the police reached out to Adam. Because if we go based on what Adam is saying, it's obvious what happened, right? It's very obvious. All this has been going down, all this shady stuff with Lori and Charles and cutting him off, and oh, he's this, and I'm gonna, take his car and drain his bank account, and crazy stuff, right? So, because Adam would have been privy to all of this, right? He would have been talking with Charles, so on and so forth. Parts of this don't make sense to me, right? So on that, let's kind of jump real quick to what he says about Alex, because it kind of reiterates this thing with me of, I just want to know, and again, I don't 100% know this right now, of when did he reach out? So Adam will say, when point blank asked, about what does he think of his brother's involvement in all this, he'll say, I do not believe that Alex ever gave CPR. He'll say, I do not believe that this was self-defense. I don't believe Alex's story, right? He 100% thinks that his sister and Alex ambushed Charles, which we know they did, right? Their stories don't match up. I mean, it does not take much to put this together when you see the different interrogations that they released, or not interrogations, the interviews that they released on that day of like Lori, Tylee, and Alex. So from Adam's perspective, he should 100% know if this is all boom, 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 boom. So again, that's where I'm like, were you at the police door screaming bloody murder? You know what I'm saying? Like, and maybe he was, I'm not sure. Let me know in the comments. But I had that question about it. I was like, this isn't adding up to me, right? Now, he will also say in regards to how his family, Janice, and we'll get to some of her thoughts on this, viewed Alex, and he's like, they viewed him as like a hero because they went along with Lori and Alex's narrative of, Alex was protecting Tylee, he was there to protect Lori, the whole 9 yards, right? Alex playing little Mr. Protector to his sister Lori, and so they went along with that, and so Adam will talk again that this is more of like a splinter, obviously, because according to him, he's coming out with, no, Alex did this and da-da-da, and of course that's not going to fly over very well, right? Now, he will say in this show, like, once police talked to him, he was like, look, this isn't right, so on and so forth. That's my question, is when was that? Like, when exactly was that, right? So he will then say, he always felt like Lori and Chad had basically already planned this with their spouses. They wanted to get this money. They wanted to use it to facilitate this whole, we're gods and goddesses and the 144,000, all that, right? Now, he will also say that he felt like if Lori and Alex had been arrested that day that went down with Charles, that other lives would have been saved. I mean, yeah, we can all agree to that, right? That's like a 100%. Now, let's talk for a minute about what he says about Melanie and Brandon. Now, remember, Melanie is the niece of Lori Him and Adam and Alex. Brandon is who she was married to, divorced. She's now with Ian Pawlowski. So there was an attempt on Brandon's life. Clearly, I mean, it looks like it was Alex that did it, facilitated this. So there's that. All in this little time frame, all this kind of stuff or whatever. So Adam will describe a very similar story here of, hearing from his family, oh, Melanie and Brandon are getting divorced. You can't talk to Brandon. You can't do that. He's bad, all this stuff. And so in the show, Adam's like, well, I was like, that's our family. Why can't we talk to him? I love Brandon. So he kept talking to Brandon. And again, piecing this stuff together, kind of comparing notes and coming up to these like, whoa, what's going on? Now, again, he will revert back to this whole, because he was doing that, he was deemed untrustworthy by his family. They're cutting him off, all this. This is kind of like a theme in the show of him saying this over and over about, like, oh, I did this, they cut me off. Oh, I did this, they cut me off. I got a bit of like him trying to distance himself from his family, right? That's just kind of a vibe I got with that. I mean, do you blame him? I mean, just like, okay. So there's that. But when asked by the reporter, whatever, whoever it was in the show, do you think it was Alex? He's like, I'm 100% convinced that it was Alex who tried to take his life, right? And the show goes over the evidence and all that kind of stuff or whatever. Obviously, Alex is no longer here, so there's that. So then when they start talking about the children, and obviously I'm talking about Tylee and JJ, he will say, once he's like watching TV, all this type of stuff, and he's seeing the kids are missing, Lori's not talking, he's like, I got that gut feeling, that sinking feeling of like, this isn't going to end well, right? Again, I just feel very much curious about, I would love to know the timeline of, okay, who is he outside of just going to his family and saying this isn't right? Is he banging on the FBI's door? On police's door? You see what I'm saying? Like, I mean, and maybe he was, I don't know. But, one thing I feel like we hear from so many people in this case, right? I'm thinking of Gibbs, I'm thinking of Zulema. All these red flags, like big red flags that are going off, right? All along the way. Nobody's saying anything. Nobody's doing anything. Bodies start piling up. Nobody's saying anything. You know what I'm saying? Like this whole thing of like where a normal everyday person would have long since been like, oh, whoa, like what? Think of April Raymond, who was in this show. April is a former friend of Lori's. Lori went to April in the beginning of this, trying to recruit her for the $144,000, and April was basically like, "Are you crazy?" Okay, that's what I'm talking about. Like that's a normal reaction to this BS, right? I do think that Chad and Lori, I think they preyed on people and whatnot, but I just see this of these other people who were like around this and just weren't saying something, right? So there's that. I digress. Let's continue. So then when the reporter asks the hard-hitting question where he's like, do you think Lori took the lives of the children, right? And kind of saying it in such a way of like her own hands, kind of a thing. And now this part I do think is interesting because he was like, you know what? I don't think that Lori physically had something to do with it. He was like, I think that Chad and Alex are the ones who physically did the act, right? And he's like, but I also believe, and I can't remember right now, but I think he was talking about both Alex and Lori. He was essentially saying that he felt like the only way they would have done something like that is if they were literally 100% convinced that it was like in God's name, right? That they would not have done this as their normal selves type of situation. And I thought that was very interesting to say. Because again, I don't know these people personally, right? So, to me, I'm almost kind of like this. I'm like, I don't care either way. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's horrible what took place. I don't care if Lori's hands weren't physically involved in it. She was definitely involved in it in some fashion. I get the distinction, right? I also can't imagine, like, God, what would that be like to be like, my brother did that to my niece and nephew. You know what I'm saying? Like, oh my God, right? That's just so mind-boggling to me. One thing I also thought was interesting, they're going through this whole timeline and they get into where Alex passes. They have Zulema, comes into the little storyline a little bit. And, Zulema. So they're talking about that, and then Janice chimes in. They revert back to, clips of her interviews and stuff, and she's, like, talking about Alex. And, I don't know if she meant to say this way, but I was just like, this is, I think, the best. This is, I love this. She was just like, well, Alex, wanted to be cremated, and so that's what we did. Those were his wishes. And we had a nice service for him. We did not invite anybody who thought he was a killer. So we had a very small, nice service. And I was like, did you think about that before you said that, right? Because 100%, I'm like, what'd you have to do, pay people to show up at this point? If that was the criteria to get in, like, who besides you and your husband were there? Okay. Now, there were some little, appearances by past faces in this. April Raymond, like I said, was in that. She's always the voice of reason in this, because she kind of gives this perspective of, and I tend to take her word more so than other people's, but she does describe Lori as like this. Yes, she was very attentive with the kids when I knew her and so on and so forth, but she makes no qualms. Like this BS that Lori came to me with, She starts talking about the whole thing that went down in regards to the allegations of Joseph and abuse and things of that nature, and Alex basically trying to say, well, this is is what happened, but he could never provide the proof, and he took it upon himself to be the little guardian. I just think that Alex wanted to be the guard dog, the watchdog, and that was what he contributed to his belonging, if you will, right? That made him feel like he was part of something, I guess. So she was there. They talk about Zulema and Alex, like I said. And I actually did a huge long video on Zulema's interview, and I break it down. So if you're watching this, I mean, it depends on when you're watching this, but go back to my other videos. That's what I'm getting at. Okay, so, but they talk about the little wedding that took place out in Vegas, and I thought this was interesting because the guy who did the wedding, and I'm just like, oh my God, I want to go to this place. But he was like, yeah, Zulema, she paid for everything. She orchestrated everything. Alex didn't want to pay for any pictures. He didn't want to pay for any extras. Like, I mean, I don't know, like some, bows to put in her hair or something, whatever. And he was like, Alex was very quiet. And I'm just like, huh, interesting. Sounds very forced. But that part was interesting, just to hear that. So really, overall, those are the main key points I want to talk about with what, Adam had to say. Again, if you followed the case through and through, parts of this will honestly kind of get under your skin because you're essentially hearing from, like, Lori's family, right? And most of this. And you just gotta be real careful with that and how much you take it seriously. So if you have, so again, watch it, okay? It's on Hulu. You can go buy the episode. Dateline 2020, Adam and Evil is the name of it. I'm glad he, at least came and like told his version, his side of it. I'm not sure of the motivations for that. I'll just say that. And, it was interesting to hear, is it a perspective that I 100% believe? Not really. Is it a perspective that I think is probably biased and motivated? Probably. But it is what it is at this point. It's definitely a good skim the surface. Here's some, this happened, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened. If you're new to the case, it would be an episode that I'm like, yeah, definitely watch it. But listen to other perspectives, because again, like I said, I just don't think that some of the stuff Janice said, I was like, that just kind of gets under my skin. Some of the stuff Adam said got under my skin. But that's it. So anyways, I just wanted to come here and talk to y'all about it. I actually also did a live chat about this on my other channel. There's a link in it in the description if you ever want to catch me live. I go there sometimes. So I went over that, but I wanted to do just like a pre-recorded kind of a video for people who like that format better, and drop it on this channel just to see like, what did y'all think? Did you watch it? What are your opinions? I'm very eager to know. So thank you for hanging out with me on the damn sofa. And until we meet back here next time, I'll see you soon.